there is much talk about this virus. No, we all are facing. We are hearing all kinds of news, and also the spiritual community in general have all kinds of theories. And this is a time when it's a challenging time for everyone. And this is a time when we need to understand some of the correlation of our existence with the subtler existence in our life, and connect it all together, and maybe develop a different perspective of why this is happening, how uh, this could have turned out to be different, or are there pieces of puzzle that we don't know.
It is an article by the Times of India entitled Coronavirus and P.R. Sarkar's Intuitional Science of Microvita by Maiti Bibansi. He is a
When was
yoga
this?
teacher.
When was this article published in Times of India?
It was published March 17th, 2020. So a few days before the coronavirus pandemic caused global shutdowns to happen.
Wow, interesting.
Hmm. And so this Maiti Bibansu fellow, he is a yoga teacher in New Delhi. Seems that he is at least partially familiar with Sri Anandamurti's works with Microvita, and he goes on to describe it as being positive, negative, and neutral Microvita. He quotes a Dutch Microvita researcher named Henk de Wever, that microvita are tiny creative catalyzing agents. They build atoms of matter, biology, and mind while cooperating with characteristics of subatomic particles and energy. Without microvita, no physical structure can exist. This is because without microvita, energy or prana cannot be organized to become vital energy and create or maintain the existence of a structure, biology, and mind. So I think that's a very kind of interesting way of describing microvita as not simply being energy, but it is something fundamental to the makeup of, I guess you might say, everything in the universe. And so earlier we were discussing that one of the crudest forms of microvita could be described in the form of a virus. So we're sort of looking at coronavirus under the lens of looking at it as microvita, but like you said earlier, Dada, that you don't really see it as being as constituting what microvita is. That if we are to say that a virus is microvita, that kind of lends to the idea that the virus has some sort of energetic potential that goes beyond simple life form, which doesn't really make sense. Rather, you might say that microvita is a fundamental quality of existence that pushes, that drives living things to act and be in a certain way. And I like that more. It's a bit more vague, but I think microvita is very vague. We don't really know much about it at this point. But it's interesting that people have been thinking about it this way, and that somebody has already gone the length to write about it in the context of the pandemic, even before the pandemic really caused the global shutdown. So yeah, I mean, do you have anything to say about this, Dada? Do you have any more ideas about how to maybe define microvita?
Yes, definitely. There are two aspects of understanding microvita. When my spiritual master Baba came up with this theory of microvita in the late 80s, he started to describe all its functions, what it does, and how it affects the body, mind, and psycho-spiritual existence as well. He started to describe things like there is a friendly microvita, there is inimical microvita, there is microvita that helps you on the level of music, there is microvita that helps you on the level of art, science, many different existence, many different types of personalities that Microvita is able to. He even went further on saying that Microvita has capability to create and destroy life. So let us take that, what he mentioned, that Microvita is a driving force. And again, a lot of what I'm saying forms just a kind of hypothesis for scientists to think in the future. And one thing I can tell you, that the idea of Microvita, where a particle or one unit being doesn't have to be a living or a non-living being. Depending on a requirement, it can change from a living to non-living and from non-living to a living. That's the nature of Microvita as Baba describes in his book. Again, this thing is he is little bit ahead of the scientific research and all that. In fact, he talks about that in his books, that I have given this theory of Microvita almost 400 years ahead of time. So we can imagine that still science has to kind of grab this idea. But for now, there are certain things that he talks about, definitely gives us some kind of clue. The one clue is that virus, this virus, not just this one, any other kind of virus, it has certain characteristics in form of, it has a kind of genetic code. It triggers certain kind of genetic mechanism in the body. So coronavirus also, when it goes in the body, it basically creates this spike protein and it takes over that one. That's how it grows in your body. So it goes in the body and tells your genes that give me some more protein, produce more protein. And then it does whatever with it. It needs to multiply through that. So it has a genetic code. But that genetic code is told to do certain things very definitely, very defined. It's not random. It's not just happening by itself. Like any kind of destructive viruses, its basic message, the basic theme is to go and destroy life. As I said, that one sentence I quoted from Baba's book, that Microvita can destroy or create life. So it seems like virus, not just this one, there has been many more aggressive viruses in the past. But if this virus has this message that go and destroy life, then it's going to do everything possible within its capacity to destroy it, even if it has to mutate itself time to time. So now we have a virus started with SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19. And then it has different kind of mutations. We have variant from Brazil, variant from South Africa, and then now in India they have found two unique variants also called B.1.6017 and 6018. And 6017 is supposed to be more aggressive. Who is telling? Who is telling this virus to go and mutate? Is it doing by itself? Question is, does the virus have its own mind? So what's the driving force behind that? For me, it's very hard to make a claim of a scientific nature, but I can always give some kind of hypothesis, based on what Baba talks about in the Microvita book. I can definitely lay out a hypothesis for all scientists in the world, any researchers, to think about it. What causes the virus to constantly keep on mutating? Is there a kind of super code behind the genetic code, and what that code is? So that's a trigger point,
Yeah, that's interesting. And there is a sort of code. So when we were talking about this the other day, I asked one of my geneticist friends who works at the University of Washington, Washington University in St. Louis. And I said, what is the driving force that pushes organisms to mutate? And his first response, without any hesitation, he says stress.
What was that?
Stress. So
Stress
is the driving force that geneticists stress. Yeah. Is the driving force that geneticists identified causes natural selection. So you might give an example. Let's give a Darwinian example of evolution. That Charles Darwin, the discoverer of his theory of evolution in on these islands off of South America, he found that the same species of bird will
Your
have
voice
a
is cutting
different
off little bit.
size beak, and
Ananta,
that
your
these
voice cutting
beaks
off little
have
bit.
given them an adaptation to eat certain kinds of food. Of generation, these birds have mutated different sizes or different thicknesses or different toughnesses of their beaks to be able to eat different foods because they were under stress. Likewise, we can see that same property playing out with a virus, in this case, coronavirus mutating incredibly rapidly because it is given several stresses. One, the stress is that because it's infecting so many people, you're looking at many, many generations of virus in a short period of time. So it's giving it the opportunity to move and evolve based on the stress that it's under. And the second form of stress that it's under is that since we are now aware of the virus, we are combating the virus. And although the individual viruses are not necessarily aware that human beings are combating it, they still get placed under stress. So someone sick with coronavirus is treated for their coronavirus that causes the virus to undergo stress. So when it multiplies and infects other people, that stress is still there. It's like in its memory, in its genetic memory. And so that really got me thinking, can we think of microvita in terms of stress? Perhaps maybe the negative variety of microvita. But we can also extrapolate that and think, well, there's also a positive and a neutral quality to microvita. So maybe like anti-stress would be the positive variety. Like,
No, I mean to add to what you are saying, in the book of
please do.
Microvita, Baba mentions clearly that your thoughts attract different types of microvita. So naturally, if you are engaged in a negative type of thinking, stress be one of them. So if you are engaged into anything like that, it's going to attract negative microvita. Now, that's just one of the factors. There could be many more factors. So thought or the stress on your thought cannot be just the only factor. There has to be also psychophysical and physical aspects as well, which can cause this. But let me draw attention to one another thing here, that stress can cause a virus to grow or mutate or to change its code. But what has told, or what kind of programming has been done to the virus that has told the virus that your nature is to mutate when there is a stress? Is it because virus is thinking by itself, hey, stress is something I want? Or it is created, there is some kind of force that has created the virus with this super message that under such and such conditions you do this. So that's that kind of theory that I'm trying to project here. And Baba in the book of Microvita trying to bring the attention of scientific community, scientists community into this direction, that hopefully someday humanity will be able to do some research on this, that why nature time to time tries to create this kind of bacteria, microorganisms, virus, or whatnot. Even there are many other things that we don't even know. So all we can do is create some kind of hypothesis based on symptoms and external expressions. So this subtler aspect of functioning of microvita, functioning of the virus, is what I can, at least from my assumption, I can think that that's the layer of microvita. Because it works on a negative level, we can always assume that there has to be an equally opposite positive level of that too. It's a kind of scientific assumption. Whenever you have minus 50, there has to be minus or plus 50 as well. So there has to be equally positive microvita for that. So the question is, what could trigger the positive microvita or positive kind of microorganisms that support life, not destroy life? And
It's like you're kind of pointing to this notion that in science would be referred to as intelligent design. That there's some sort of mind, like a super mind that would that has imprinted itself into the code underlying life form.
now I'm kind of pointing out to two things. One is that every object, every unit, every molecule, every organism definitely has a nucleus. We all cannot, no one can deny that. It has a nucleus. We also know that it has a defined nature of how it works. This also cannot be denied. Every element has a property. Every organism has its own nature, characteristics. So because of these two things, they behave in certain way. Now, we can safely assume that any element or organism has some kind of intelligence, as you are mentioning, is encoded, embedded in it. But there is one another thing that I want to again bring some thoughts, that these organisms and these elements also talk to something called cosmic mind, because every organism has a nucleus, but that's not the end of the world. That nucleus is also part of something else, and that something else also has a nucleus. So this whole universe also has a nucleus. The earth has its own nucleus. The solar system has its own nucleus. So the nucleus of an atom or a molecule or an organism is not the final nucleus. It's basically a nucleus within a nucleus. So having that said, that do all the nucleus of the universe talk to each other? And I think, I think that even this virus has got its own nucleus, and some kind of code, some kind of intelligence is built into it. But that particular aspect of its existence also relates with the greater environment, the greater universal nucleus also. So it's also driven by some kind of cosmic thinking, collective thinking, thought waves from the collective mind.
That's an interesting image that you have kind of pointed to there, of like sort of reflections of this nucleic system that you see represented in every level of the cosmos, like the solar system, the Earth, down to atoms, and possibly even smaller than that. And it's actually, when you look at it that way, that's actually very incredible and very interesting. It brings to mind a story that I heard that is common story for people to point to when they're talking about the term interdependence. So within the Buddhist world, the
very
term
much. You got the point. Yes.
So this story is Indra's net. That Indra has a beautiful net of diamonds that are so perfect and so pristine that in each diamond you have the entire universe reflected in it. And then if you can imagine infinite web of diamonds, all of them reflecting the universe and reflecting each other, sort of a visual representation of interdependence. And it points to the notion of infinity in a kind of like visual standard. So I guess from there, if we were to think about Microvita within that context, wow, it becomes the
No, I
challenge
mean,
has
yeah,
now.
let me give you one more dimension to the thoughts
Sure.
on Microvita. It's like this. The the collective thought process has impact also on the individual thought process.
Hmm.
The combined collective thinking force impacts the thinking force of one unit nucleus also.
Hmm.
Just to give you an example, a 13 years age of kid of today is far more intelligent than a kid of 13 years of age born, let's say,
Hmm.
5,000 years ago. What has changed is the same human beings 5,000 years ago, and we are the same human beings 5,000 years later. Why the mind is so evolved? Why a baby is born with some kind of preconceived intelligence already? And they are not behaving like orangutans or chimpanzees, although our origin is same. There is a collective genetic mutation.
Hmm.
Collective genetic mutation happens. So genes do talk to each other and relate to each other and learn from each other, from one unit to
Hmm.
unit, one unit nucleus to another unit nucleus. So in that terms, the other example that I can give you is, let's imagine a village of musicians. And in that village, everybody is a wonderful musician. And one baby is born one fine morning, and this baby is born with musical qualities. By the age of 3, by the age of 4, he or she is like a champion of singing, champion of musical instruments. How did that happen? Genes, the carried over genes has learned from the collective thinking of that village. That village has given birth to exceptional musicians. So the collective thought process does have impact. And again, I
Hmm.
mean, I'm not going to sit into a laboratory and going to prove all that in a material sense, but think logically, a lot of things would start to at least make sense for us. And there
Hmm.
are many things we can understand by just observing and making some kind of analytical thinking from our side. So the um, collective force has impact on the nucleus, the unit existence. Similarly, because I'm talking about collective, there are many levels of collective. There is a collective nucleus or the collective psychic force of the whole earth. Similarly, there is a collective psychic force of the whole solar system. Similarly, there is a collective psychic force of the whole universe. Now, the question is that collective psychic force of the whole universe, how does it talk to the psychic force of one unit nucleus? Are you
Hmm.
getting my point? See,
I am, yes.
the collective mind or the collective psychic force from the nucleus of the whole universe has to talk to the nucleus of one tiniest unit. How
Hmm.
does it talk? Definitely, they don't have a telephone, they don't have radio signals. The medium of talking happening between the collective force or the collective mind with the unit mind happens through microvita.
It's like intuitive almost. It's like the word that comes to mind is like a feeling, like an intuitive feeling that you
Yeah, so
might get.
microvita becomes a kind of carrier of this message from the
Mm.
collective mind to the unit mind, or
Mm.
collective psychic force to the unit psychic force, or collective
Mm.
intelligence to the unit intelligence.
So you're sort of talking about the paradigm of collective mind consciousness communicating with individual mind consciousness, and this
Not exactly
communication.
imitating, but getting an influence of that.
Okay, okay, yeah. So influencing, maybe, yeah, not directly like transmitting data, but that there's a sort of intuitive influence that happens on the individual.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
so we began this conversation talking about the genetic function of mutation. So I just kind of want to point to two complexes within genetics that you have mutation, which happens across generations. So my children, my children's children would have the effects of mutation. There's another branch
Not
of
just
genetics
that, you
called,
have, when genetic mutations happens, it happens by the
mm,
influence of the race, means yourself, and
right,
also there is influence of the environment,
right, right.
and also
So that,
there is also the influence of the cosmic force, or I can say the uh, universal psychic force.
right. And so those environmental factors that we're talking about within one lifetime is what geneticists refer to as epigenetics. So
Right.
epigenetics is the turning on and the turning off of genes that already exist. It's not
Mhm.
exactly new. It's sort of like you might imagine a big server room filled with lights. Some of the lights are turned on and some of them are turned off. Kind of like that with our gene pool. So you might imagine that, like what you're saying, environmental effects, what you eat, what you don't eat, how stressed out you are, actually has a massive impact on what's called methylation and acetylation of these genes. So that's the turning on and the turning off. If you're really stressed out, certain genes are going to be turned on to um, have you sort of react in a certain way. And that turning on and turning off of genes will get passed on to offspring to then mutate. So you gave the example of a village where everyone is really talented musicians, and like the children are progressively more and more talented at their musical craft. Well, that's because of epigenetics from their parents and their grandparents and their great grandparents. As they practiced more, they got better, and they produced offspring. Their offspring were even in a more advantageous situation. So it might be more accurate microvita as a sort of epigenetic manifestation. It affects us in this lifetime as well as other lifetimes, but it's kind of an incredible, Dara, you really helped me think about it that way because, I was thinking about it in terms of genetics and epigenetics, but kind of on this like bigger scale. But now when you talk about it as like the collective communicating with the individual or influencing, we might say more accurately, influencing the individual. Yeah, it's really exciting then to think about it as it's like, yeah, these like light switches. Like you just turned on a light switch in my head. So it's like all these like light switches turning on and turning off. And wow, that is actually really incredible to think about it that way.
Right. So the whole idea of microvita, and in relation to the virus situation we have and any other kind of virus, it's the concept is very unique. What
Hmm.
Baba has talked about in the book of Microvita, no one has ever thought in that dimension, in
Hmm.
that particular uh, aspect of existence, that there could be this kind of unit beings, or I don't know whether you call it unit beings or things, because microvita can be living and non-living both. It's hard to
Right.
say what exactly it is. It can be, um, in fact, it has the ability to destroy and create the life, which means microvita is one of the key influencing factors. At least that's the kind of hypothesis that's coming out, that
Hmm.
microvita is the key influencer behind the genetic intelligence and genetic motive of a virus. It has some kind of genetic motive, that it has to behave in certain way, it has to mutate in certain way, it has to
Hmm.
achieve these kind of results, that is to kill. So that
Hmm.
motive behind that is microvita pushing it. And I just wanted to open the other dimensions of thinking by mentioning that. because of a unit being is also connected to the collective being, and microvita becomes a kind of carrier of the messages.
So you might say that the propensity of coronavirus to infect and to spread and to kill was a sort of outcome of like global collective negativity. So maybe our fixation on killing has in fact spawned or may have influenced the spawning of a new disease that kills.
Yeah, literally, I mean, if you think in objective terms, then you would probably not agree, because there is no material scientific substance to hold to that. But if you start to think a little bit more from a point of analyzing the situation, you will see that the collective thought process of human beings has not only influence on virus or microorganisms, but also environment, the different balance of what you can say, the flora and fauna, the different life forms. So there is the influence of collective thought process impacts everything on this planet, and microorganisms are no exception. So negative thinking leads to um, the undesirable actions in our life, and undesirable actions have undesirable reactions. And maybe in a small context you may not sense that very much. If I go and eat something very spicy and fried food like Indian samosa one or two times, then it's not going to bother so much. But if I do that over the time again and again, someday I'm going to have acid reflux or even ulcer. So you see that because mind influences the action, and the action basically brings a reaction. If you think about this whole phenomena on a collective level, then it will start to make sense how negative thought process can not only give birth to a situation what we are facing through today, even in the future to come. The negative thought process, the collective negative emphasis can actually will bring many more challenges to us.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe we can also have a sort of hope for the future in the sense that fear could be seen as a very negative outlook, and many people have been very afraid during this pandemic. But with the rollout of vaccines and with our system for dealing with coronavirus is getting more refined, it seems like, and as more time just passes, seems like the general direction of at least people here in the United States. I'm not sure exactly how the rest of the world is, but people here in the United States might be having a bit more of a hopeful outlook for the future, that we no longer need to be so afraid of the pandemic, and maybe that will disempower these diseases through these sort of more positive intentions. I guess it also matters what we do with that, and how we use that as a collective uh, is a whole other challenge right there, to influence us all as a collective to be, how should we say? I don't want to say more positive because it sounds almost hollow. Like, oh, just be positive. Like, I don't want to put it like that.
Right, right. No, I would put it like this, that on an individual level, you must, because the demon has been out, you can't just call it off. The demon has been out, so therefore we need to do everything within our capacity to contain it, control it. So follow all the protocols, have mask, distancing, uh, do exercises every day so that keep your metabolism better. One thing definitely I've seen helps from reading articles on Google, that If you have sufficient level of vitamin D in your body,
Yes.
that helps a lot. So make
Mhm.
sure that you are boosted with vitamin D, and along with that, vitamin C, that helps your immune. Have a very good, healthy food in your life, so that this food also, because of food being a nutrient, it brings all these minerals and vitamins. So healthy food, eat that. And then your point, what you're talking about, positive thinking. Positive thinking not only gives you psychic force, but also influences your physical actions. So therefore, positive thinking, whether we have virus or not, positive thinking is always good. So why not now? So I think, there is a country, I would not name it. Uh, I would leave that for people who listen to this video to guess in their mind. There is a country where last year, the record is that the last year, the number of suicidal deaths, means people killing themselves by suicide, exceeds the number of deaths by coronavirus.
Mm.
What do you
Mm.
talk? What do you say about that?
I
Definitely,
think I
this
know
is
what
impacting the minds
you're
of
talking
people.
about.
Yeah, definitely, this is impacting people's being in the house by themselves. They need to engage their mental tabula, their mental ectoplasm into something creative, something positive. And
Mm.
my favorite suggestion to everyone, as usual, I do, is people should learn and do meditation in their life, and do whatever you are. It's always a good thing. I'm not saying just because it's a virus situation now. It's in general, it is a good thing. So, and since you are sitting at home more and more, if you can engage in activities like doing yoga, doing meditation, reading spiritual books, entertain yourself in a nice way, not video games kind of thing. Where, as you said, coronavirus scientists, they are talking about, if you have more stress on the mind, the virus triggers, the genes mutate. So don't play stressful games. Don't. So the lifestyle is going to have impact, definitely. And
Mm.
talk to your friends, people, and always try to share happiness and positivity as much as you can. On the other hand, on the collective level, I think every time when a pandemic of this scale happens on this earth, it always gives a food for scientists to think about. And every time the food is different. This time the food
Mm.
is that with all our technology and advancement in the science, a new food has come up, that
Mm.
why virus mutate, why they spread so fast, why they change the nature, how it impacts the lives of people. So, and the scientific community doesn't know that if this is the end of it. There could be, in fact, on the contrary, they are talking about there could be many more situations like this to come.
There probably will.
Yeah, so let this be a turning point for us, for all of us, to uh, at least to develop a mindset of doing a research and finding out that how our thoughts on the unit level is connected with the thoughts on the collective level. How does that influence our behavior? How does that influence the existence of microorganisms in our life? What um, I mean, one thing is definitely that there are certain type of bacteria in our body that grow depends on how you think.
Yeah.
So this thought process, how it is impacting the health and all that, I think more and more research needs to be done. We should be open to all
No,
all
it's
sorts
so,
of ideas.
yeah. The scientific research is more and more confirming some truths that have been held by a lot of traditions across the world. That these truths that were held by these traditions for thousands of years, and just now scientists are like, oh, looks like, yeah, it does really matter how you think and how you treat your stomach. And
Yeah,
well,
very much.
Ayurveda's been teaching this for thousands of years, so all of a sudden
Right.
it's interesting that we as a society need to validate these traditional truths somehow with science as if they weren't already valid to begin with. So um, it's important in a sense, I think, that science is doing that, but also I think it's important that we don't give science more credit than it's due. Because if it is now validating things that were already known to be truth, and we're suddenly looking at it again and we're like, ah, yes, they were right all along, then where does the real wisdom lie? Does it lie in science or does it lie in the traditional, deeper understanding of
See,
what
the
life
the,
is?
the philosophy has always been the mother of science, you know that. So philosophy comes from the ability of somebody or the intelligence of somebody to look at things and perceive things which normally people do not perceive. And I think that's the source of science. Science begins from thinking and creating a hypothesis.
Mm,
So science cannot be just in the laboratory and big experiment halls. The science can start from your mind itself.
mm,
We all can be scientists and thinkers, but the most important thing is that a lot of people get bothered by this idea of um, what is the right thing to do, what is not the right thing to do in the life. I would
mm,
say that the best thing one can do in life is to be the happiest person and
mm,
using everything what you have, your food, your life, your friends, your people, use everything to your advantage to make yourself happy. And that's one of the ways how you can boost up your mind and body both.
mm.
Yeah,
I
this
like
is
that.
a
How do
this
you?
is the, yeah, this is the great opportunity for everyone. It's challenging times
Yeah,
for everybody, I know, but also with challenges comes an opportunity for us to rethink the strategies of life.
yeah. Yeah, I mean that might be a very good stopping point for today's discussion, but I just wanted to touch just for a little bit on what you were saying earlier about how during these moments of crisis, especially pandemics, it gives scientists food to think about certain things. And well, what we're doing right now is we're having a video conference over a program that has really been experimented a lot with during the pandemic, and a lot of people have learned how to use these programs and how to better understand these programs and more personalize these programs, human use, etc. So one thing that has been sort of weighing on my mind in terms of how science and spirituality can really come together is artificial intelligence.
Very
I think that could
much.
be a
Yeah.
good discussion topic for another time that we have a meeting, and how to think about intelligence. How do we define it? Is natural intelligence more important than artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence be used to further our goals in life in a positive way? I mean, a lot of these questions come up, and especially within the context of things like karma and rebirth. Um, I think artificial intelligence is even that much more important to talk about. So maybe that can be our next discussion.
Yeah, I mean tomorrow when we meet up again, we can talk about this. The,
Okay,
what is artificial intelligence? What's the role of artificial intelligence in our life, and how it is even can it be even connected to spirituality?
hmm,
Sure. Thank you,
great.
Ananta. That was a wonderful discussion.
That was really nice question. I'm looking forward to more all throughout this week and next week.
Sure. Thank you. And you take care.
Bye bye. Namaskar. Thanks,
Namaskar.
everyone.
Namaskar.